Hello, everybody. And in this unit, we're going to be talking about the digestive system. So let me get my pointer ready and we're ready to roll. All right. So in terms of kind of an overview of this system, again, we have to think about the relationship between the food that we eat and how that might affect our health status, our mental, our emotional status, our sense of well-being. Certainly nutrition and what we are consuming in those regards make a huge difference in our overall health. Okay. And so essentially when we talk about this system, digestion has to do with taking those foods that we consume and breaking them down into usable energy within the body. And it's really two different processes. So again, we're going to take those molecules and break them into smaller molecules, and then we have to also be able to absorb them. So move them from that digestive tract into the bloodstream to the liver where we're going to process them. And then we can modify them from a chemical perspective based on the needs of the body at that particular time. Okay. So when we think about, what this involves, there's the GI tract, which you can kind of see here is the path through which the food will flow. So we're going to move from the mouth to the pharynx, through the esophagus, stomach, small intestines, large intestines, and then the anus. And then the other category of organs that we'll discuss today are the accessory organs. And the accessory organs are going to assist us in the process of digestion in one way or another, whether that's the mechanical breakdown or the chemical processes of breaking those bonds. Okay, so again, we're going to have the teeth, the tongue, gallbladder, salivary glands, liver, and pancreas that are going to be involved there. Let me look at my notes before I move forward, see what else I wanted to tell you about. Digestion involves taking the 6 nutrients that we consume. So that would be carbohydrates, proteins, fats. Those are your 3 macronutrients. But then also vitamins, minerals, and water, which vitamins and minerals are considered micronutrients because we need them in smaller quantities. And then water is sometimes put into that micronutrient category. I don't like that because we need it in large quantities, but sometimes it is linked with vitamins and minerals. But we're going to mechanically and chemically break them down. We're going to absorb them and utilize them. Yep. And one other thing to note with these accessory organs, they're going to lie external to that GI tract, but assist in some type of way. And we'll talk about how they do that here coming up. Okay. So again, that digestive process involves breaking down ingested food through the mechanical and enzymatic activity so that it can be absorbed into the body. So again, nutrients aren't technically part of the body until we've absorbed them. And again, that absorptive process involves movement from that GI tract into the bloodstream. We'll talk about the hepatic portal system and kind of how we move those items into the bloodstream. Then they're going to travel to the liver so that we can process them. Sorry, my notes keep going away. I have them pulled up on my phone, but they keep disappearing. So again, if we were to define mechanical digestion, this is the breakdown of large pieces into smaller pieces without altering their chemical configuration, versus chemical digestion involves breaking down foods into simpler chemicals. So again, think about breaking those chemical bonds in order for us to modify that molecule from a chemical perspective. Okay. So we have 6 digestive processes or 6 essential activities that we need to do in order for us to do the things we need to do with the food. Okay, so number 1, ingestion. Take the food into the mouth. Number 2 is propulsion. Movement of food through the GI tract. So again, we have to allow those molecules to move from one section to the next so that we can kind of keep it flowing in a unidirectional way through the body. Number 3 is mechanical digestion, and this will be the breakdown of food into smaller pieces via enzymes. Number 4 is chemical digestion, and this is when we take complex foods such as carbs, proteins, and fats and break them down into their chemical building blocks, which for carbs, we would call them like simple sugars or monosaccharides. For proteins, their building block is amino acids. And for fats, we'll break those down from a triglyceride into fatty acids and a glycerol backbone. Okay. Number 5 here is absorption. And as I've already mentioned, this is the transportation of those nutrients from the digestive tract into the bloodstream so that we can utilize them throughout the body. And then lastly, number 6 is defecation, and this is the elimination of waste products through feces. Okay. So when we think about kind of the gross anatomy here, we're looking at the peritoneal cavity, and we can see a couple different linings here. Okay, so you can see kind of this visceral region or this abdominal pelvic region here. And if you remember from our first unit, we've got a couple different connective tissue layers, and the most outer layer is the parietal peritoneum. Okay, and that's this connective tissue layer shown in red here, and that's going to surround that entire cavity. Okay, so that's the parietal peritoneum. And then the visceral peritoneum is going to be kind of like in this blue here, and the visceral is going to lie directly on top of those organs. And interestingly, when we think about how this relates or how this is kind of different from what we saw like in comparison to like the heart or the lungs, this parietal peritoneum surrounds the entire GI tract. And then that visceral layer is going to lie directly on top of those organs. So that peritoneal cavity is actually pretty good size. Now, again, imagine here's your liver, and these items here are not full right now. So again, think about like when you eat a large meal, how much size we have to be able to change in order to kind of account for that. And that's what we're kind of seeing here with that big old peritoneal cavity here. Okay, let's see what else. Um, Within this cavity, we have serous fluid. And again, this will lie between that parietal peritoneum and that visceral peritoneum. And again, this is going to allow those digestive organs to glide easily along each other when they're doing their digestive processes. It also allows for them to distend pretty substantially in order for us to consume a large amount of food and allow that food to kind of comfortably move through the system. This is nice. This just kind of shows you the flow of food through that GI tract. So again, nothing new here. I did add a couple sections within the stomach, the small intestines, and the large intestine. So again, pay attention to the arrows, the direction that they flow. But we're going mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach. We're going to move through the cardiac and pyloric region into the small intestines, where we have 3 different sections. We have the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. And from the ileum, we're going to head into the large intestines, where we're going to travel up the ascending colon, across the transverse, and down the descending through the sigmoid colon and to the anus. So again, just adding just a few little pieces here when we take a look at the flow of food. And as we kind of move forward, I'm going to kind of get into what's happening at each of these locations and kind of some of the unique anatomical structures that we're going to see in each of these organs. Okay, so again, this is just a nice overview that kind of gives us some of the physiology of what's going on. Again, it also allows you to kind of see everything. Things to note here. So again, mouth, pharynx, we can also see the relationship between the salivary glands, which we said were an accessory organ. Then we're going to slide that food down the esophagus into the stomach. Notice the proximity of the stomach to the liver and the gallbladder. From the stomach, we're going to head into the small intestines. Pancreas is going to lie directly inferior to the stomach. And again, once we move through the small intestines, we're going to come to the ascending portion of the colon, transverse, descending, sigmoid, and then finally the anus is the terminal section of those large intestines, which you can kind of see here. This I just thought was interesting. This just kind of shows you the average amount of time food would spend in each of these locations. So within the mouth, we spend about a one minute chewing the food, enjoying the taste, the texture, that sort of stuff. Then the food will spend about 4 to 8 seconds in the esophagus. Then it heads to the stomach, where it might spend 2 to 4 hours. Again, the length of time that we spend in the stomach and in the small intestines varies depending on the um, composition of that food. So for example, proteins take significantly longer for us to digest in comparison to like a simple sugar. So again, a simple sugar would get through the system pretty darn quick versus something like a high protein, like turkey sandwich on whole wheat bread or something along those lines. It's got a fair amount of protein in it. That's going to sit a little bit longer because it's more difficult for us to break that down. Again, when we think about small intestines, same gig. So the stomach and the small intestines are where a lot of the digestion and absorption will occur. Well, absorption is going to be in the small intestines pretty much, nothing in the stomach. So again, that's where those things will occur. And then the colon is going to kind of store that waste product that we want to eliminate as feces. And this can stay in the system for 10 hours to up to several days, depending on the individual. So again, uh, you know, some people will eliminate feces every day, multiple times a day. Some it's like every other day, once a week, something like that. So again, what's normal can vary pretty substantially from person to person, depending on things like what they eat, what their metabolism is, exercise levels. All those factors will kind of play into how frequently they are getting rid of their waste products. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at what's happening from a histological perspective. So kind of zooming in to look at the wall of that GI tract. Okay, and so again, we essentially have 4 layers. We have a mucosa, a submucosa, muscularis externus, and serosa. Okay, so the mucosa is going to be our most internal layer. Next in the pecking order is the submucosa. Then we have the muscularis layer, which is 2 layers. There's an inner and an outer. And then lastly, the serosa is going to be the most external of the layers. Okay. So again, we're going to take a look at what's happening within each of these, and we're going to start internally. We're going to start with the mucosa, and we can break up that mucosa into even more layers, which is fun. So we have 3 sublayers within that mucosa. This says mucosa over here. I know it's hard to read, but this is the mucosa, or that innermost layer. And it's made up of 3 things. We have the epithelium, we have the lamina propria, and then we have a muscularis mucosal layer. Okay, so the epithelial layer, which is the most internal, is going to help us absorb nutrients and secrete mucus. Then we have lamina propria, which, if you remember back to our tissues unit, any place there's an epithelial layer, there's also a connective tissue layer. So this lamina propria is going to be a loose connective tissue layer. It'll contain capillaries that are going to help us to nourish the lining. So it's going to maintain the health of this epithelial lining. It's also going to contain those capillaries so that we can potentially absorb molecules across the membrane based on where it is within that GI tract. Okay. And then lastly, that muscularis mucosa is a thin layer of smooth muscle that's going to help with the movement of food. Okay, so now we're moving just slightly superficial. So again, we talked about the mucosa. Now we're moving to the submucosa. And the submucosa is a layer of loose areolar and dense irregular connective tissue. And this will contain blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. It contains elastic fibers that's going to allow this layer to return to its resting shape once the food passes through. So again, this layer is really responsible for creating distension, so we can kind of stretch out the tube based on how much food we're consuming at any given time without really any issues. Okay, next we move to layer 3, and this layer is the muscularis externus. Also, sometimes it's just called the muscularis layer. And this layer contains 2 layers of smooth muscle. We're going to have a circular layer, which you can kind of see here is in this little square. circular layer. So again, imagine that the smooth muscle like surrounds the tube so that it can squeeze. Okay, so that circular layer's job is to squeeze that tube, so make it smaller. And then we also have, if we move a little more superficial, we have a longitudinal layer. And so imagine that here's my tube. The longitudinal layer is like a bunch of straws that lay around it, basically. And that the job of the longitudinal layer is to shorten the tube. Okay. And together, both of these smooth muscle layers, that circular layer and the longitudinal layer, are responsible for peristalsis. And peristalsis is going to be like this progressive wave-like contraction of these layers that's going to squeeze the food through the GI tract. And I guess my best analogy or like reference point when you think about peristalsis is like if you've ever seen a snake eat, or if you've ever seen like a video of a snake eat, that's basically what happens. That is peristalsis. And again, that's what's happening within our digestive tract. So again, we're going to squeeze the tube, and then we're also going to contract like the longitudinal layer, which is going to allow us to shorten the tube. And together, those two processes are going to allow us to kind of slowly push that food through the tube in order for us to keep it moving forward. Okay. Next, we're moving to the serosa layer, and this is the same as that visceral peritoneum that we talked about. So it's the outermost layer of the GI tract, and it's formed from simple squamous epithelial layers, or simple squamous epithelium tissue. Okay, so this picture is nice. It kind of shows you all of those layers that we've just talked about. So you can see those epithelial layers on that internal section. Next, you can see that submucosa that's got both blood vessels and lymphatic vessels that we talked about. So you can see some lymphatic vessels coming on in here. Then you can see the circular muscular layer, the longitudinal muscular layer, and then the serosa, which we just talked about, which is made of a simple squamous epithelium. Okay, so I thought this was a good point in our lecture, or like in the organization of the class, to kind of talk a little bit about smooth muscle. And smooth muscle is pretty freaking cool, honestly. But essentially, it's going to work pretty differently than skeletal muscle. And so I wanted to kind of just briefly touch on how it differs from skeletal muscle and even from cardiac muscle. So there are 6 different locations that we find smooth muscle within the body. We'll find this in the iris of the eye, walls of the blood vessels, respiratory tubes, digestive tubes, urinary organs, and reproductive organs. Okay. And smooth muscle fibers are generally grouped into sheets. And while they are certainly not fast, they're going to be very slow in terms of their action. They can create a sustained contraction that can last like a really long time. So they're very fatigue resistant, and they can work for many, many hours at a time without fatiguing. Smooth muscle takes 30 times longer to contract and relax in comparison to skeletal muscle. Which is fine because they are fatigue resistant, and they can like continue to contract for up to 6 to 8 hours, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so fatigue resistance is an important component of smooth muscle because we have a moderate amount of contracting every day without fatiguing. Digestion alone can account for 6 to 8 hours of smooth muscle contraction. So it's really important that this type of muscle be fatigue resistant for those reasons. Okay. What about neural innervation? So we don't have voluntary control over the contraction of smooth muscle. However, it is innervated by the autonomic nervous system. So for example, like the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system will have some kind of overarching control of this system. So when we think about the autonomic response, it's going to be the parasympathetic innervation that will allow the digestive system to kind of be activated. Like we said, we have smooth muscles that are going to be kind of found in sheets. and they can spread a signal through what are called gap junctions. And again, imagine that a gap junction is like a conjoining hotel room door, right? So I can tell somebody in the other hotel room what's going on without leaving my room, without it really being too much work. Okay, so these specialized gap junctions are going to allow us to, I don't want to say quickly because, like we just said, smooth muscle isn't very fast, but we'll say efficiently be able to kind of send that message from cell to cell. Okay, so different than what we see in skeletal muscle, where the alpha motor neuron has to interact with every single muscle cell. Within the smooth muscle, it's just like one cell has to be activated and then they can kind of like spread the signal amongst themselves. So again, the gap junctions make it a little bit different in terms of its activation. So that is unique. Let's see the other things to note here. The myenteric nerve plexus lies in the muscularis layer between two layers of smooth muscle. So again, when we think about causing the stimulation of these, that has to do with that myenteric nerve plexus kind of activating that smooth muscle. And again, they can kind of transfer that signal from door to door. Okay. Again, the digestive tract is largely autonomic in nature, although it does contain what's called an enteric nervous system. An enteric nervous system means that the digestion occurs largely from an internal nervous system. So basically what I'm saying is like there's like these reflexes set up within the digestive tract that basically like if the walls are stretched, that's going to cause a result, right? So that's going to cause the activation of that smooth muscle. That's going to kind of activate that peristalsis and allow us to kind of move that food through or begin digestion, churning, whatever might happen. So a lot of what's going on in this enteric system or this enteric nervous system is a reflex, right? So again, we've got many reflex arcs going on here that are going to allow us to kind of take care of ourselves really from the digestive perspective. They don't have to wait for something from higher order or anything else like that in order to get that digestive process going. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're ready to talk about the flow of food through the digestive tract. And I think I'll just go through just a few of these and then we'll kind of pick up in class from here. So let's get it going. Okay, so we'll start with the mouth. And the mouth is a mucus-lined cavity, and it contains kind of two sections. So it contains the vestibule, which is the spot between your teeth and your cheeks or lips. So if you took your tongue and kind of run it on top of your teeth, that's the vestibule. Okay, so it's between your teeth and your cheeks or your lips. And then number 2 is the oral cavity proper, and this lies internal to your teeth. So that's like what you would commonly think of when you think of your mouth is like this oral cavity proper, so internal to your teeth. Okay. As we said, this is a mucus-lined cavity, and the lining of the mouth contains thick stratified squamous epithelium. And the reason for that is it's going to help us protect from the abrasion of sharp food pieces. Also think about the amount of acidity that we must undergo, like if we're consuming like a lime margarita or something where it's got a lot of acidity, or even ketchup or something spicy. So again, we really challenge ourselves from a I don't want to say safety perspective, but like this mucus lining undergoes like a lot of stress, right? So again, we're having a huge turnover of cells in this particular area, and it's got to be a thick stratified squamous in order for us to kind of stay protected. Okay. Moving forward to the tongue, and the tongue is primarily made of a muscle, and its job is to mix food with saliva and form a compact bolus of food before swallowing. Certainly also helps us with speech. And we've got a couple different papillae that we'll find or on the tongue, I should say. We have what's known as filiform papillae. We have fungiform and vallate. Okay, so filiform papillae are roughening the tongue and enable it to grasp and manipulate food. The fungiform are less abundant, and those are going to contain our taste buds. And then the vallate mark the border of the tongue, and they also contain taste buds. Okay, so let's take a look at what these look like. Okay, so here you can see we've got those filiform kind of all over the place. The filiform are gonna, again, help us like to roughen the tongue and to grasp and manipulate food molecules so that it kind of like is sticky almost, think like sandpapery. Okay, then we have the fungiform papillae. Again, hard to really see how they look different, but just know they're different functions. Those fungiform are going to contain taste buds, and then the valate are going to be kind of creating this posterior border of the tongue, and these valate papillae are going to also contain taste buds. Probably bitter taste buds if I were to, be more specific about it. But again, those are going to be kind of on that posterior border of the tongue. Okay, let's talk about teeth. Okay, so teeth are going to help us with mechanical digestion. They're going to tear and grind food into smaller pieces or fragments, and they're classified based on their shape and function. Okay, so we have incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Okay, the incisors are good for nipping off pieces of food, and they're going to be chisel shaped. Number 2, the canines are going to be cone shaped, and their job is to tear and pierce. The premolars are broad and round, and their job is to grind up food. And then lastly, the molars are also broad and round, and they are our best grinders. Okay, so let's take a look at where they are located. Okay, so here you can see those incisors are kind of up front. Then the canines are going to be next, kind of in line over here. Then we have our premolars. And then lastly, we have the molars in the back. And I think that's a good place to stop for today. So thanks for your patience, and we'll plan to pick up on salivary glands when I see you next.